It began with a routine review that was never meant to become a scandal. Palace aides believed the documents would pass unnoticed, filed away among decades of royal records. But one detail caught Prince William's attention and refused to let go. What appeared to be an innocent reference to Princess Diana soon opened the door to a controversy that insiders had spent months trying to keep hidden from public view. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, nobody thought much of it. Royal archives contain thousands of documents, correspondence files, historical records, and ceremonial references accumulated over generations. Most reviews are routine, administrative exercises designed to preserve history rather than create headlines. But according to growing palace speculation, something about this particular review felt different from the beginning. The atmosphere surrounding it reportedly changed the moment William paused over a reference connected to Princess Diana's legacy. What exactly he saw remains the subject of intense rumor. Some insiders claimed it involved historical records tied to Diana's charitable work. Others suggested it related to the way her legacy was being discussed in certain private circles. Whatever the truth may be, reports indicate that the discovery immediately attracted William's attention. Those close to the situation allegedly noticed a shift in his focus. Questions were asked, additional records were requested. Conversations that had once seemed routine suddenly became far more serious. That was when palace staff reportedly began growing nervous. According to royal commentators, aides who normally handled archival matters with complete confidence became unusually cautious. Requests for clarification were met with vague responses. Certain individuals reportedly appeared reluctant to discuss the issue at all. The deeper William looked, the more resistance he seemed to encounter. It was not open opposition, it was something subtler, a hesitation, a discomfort, the kind of reaction that often appears when people know more than they are willing to say. That silence only fueled further suspicion. For William, this was never simply about paperwork. Diana's legacy occupies a unique place within both the monarchy and his own life. Her memory remains one of the most emotionally powerful forces in modern royal history. Any suggestion that her name, influence, or legacy was being used in a way that required investigation would naturally command his full attention. As reports of his growing concern spread quietly through palace circles, speculation intensified among those who sensed a larger story waiting to emerge. Soon, royal correspondents began hearing whispers of their own. The rumors remained fragmented at first. No one seemed willing to provide a complete picture. Yet pieces of information continued surfacing from different directions, each pointing toward the same conclusion. Something connected to Diana's legacy had triggered concern at a very high level. What began as a routine review was gradually evolving into one of the most talked about mysteries inside royal circles. Journalists, commentators, and longtime palace observers all found themselves asking the same question. What had William discovered that caused such an unusual reaction? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach. But by then, one thing had become clear. William was no longer willing to let the matter rest. The questions had become too important, the silence had become too suspicious, and the deeper he investigated, the more it appeared that the issue extended far beyond a simple historical reference. Hidden beneath layers of protocol, discretion, and carefully guarded conversations was a controversy that threatened to reopen old wounds and ignite new tensions. But what William uncovered next suggested this wasn't merely a misunderstanding, it was the beginning of a battle over who had the right to claim Diana's legacy. Long after her passing, Princess Diana remains one of the most powerful figures in royal history. Her influence extends far beyond photographs, speeches, or public memory. To millions, she represents compassion, sacrifice, and a unique connection to the public. That is why any suggestion that her legacy might be redirected, redefined, or claimed by others carries enormous emotional weight and instantly captures national attention. The deeper William's investigation moved, the clearer one reality became. This story was never simply about documents hidden inside royal archives, it was about Diana herself. More specifically, it was about the extraordinary influence she continues to hold decades after her passing. Few figures in modern history have left such a lasting emotional imprint on both an institution and the people who watched it. Time has changed governments, monarchs, and public priorities, yet Diana's presence continues to linger in a way that few could have predicted. That enduring influence is precisely what makes her legacy so powerful. For millions around the world, Diana was more than a princess. She became a symbol, a figure associated with empathy, vulnerability, and a willingness to connect with ordinary people in ways that often felt revolutionary for her time. Her story was filled with triumphs and heartbreaks, public admiration and personal struggle. That contrast made her unforgettable. It transformed her from a royal figure into something much larger, a lasting part of cultural memory itself. And that memory remains fiercely protected. Inside royal circles, Diana's legacy occupies a uniquely sensitive position. It is connected not only to public affection but also to the future of the monarchy. Every reference to her name carries significance. Every discussion involving her memory attracts attention, because Diana's story is inseparable from the story of Prince William. The future king is not merely one of her children. In the eyes of many observers, he has become the principal guardian of the values, causes, and public connection she represented during her lifetime. That responsibility has shaped much of his public journey. Over the years, William has repeatedly honored causes associated with his mother, while carefully protecting her memory from becoming a source of unnecessary controversy. It has often been a delicate balance. On one hand, Diana remains an essential part of royal history. On the other, her legacy carries emotions so powerful that even small disputes can generate enormous public reactions. That is why reports suggesting questions about ownership, association, or representation immediately attracted such intense interest. The public understood the stakes. As rumors continued spreading, many people viewed the controversy through a broader lens. This was no longer just a question about records or references. It became a debate about who has the right to stand closest to one of the most beloved figures in royal history. Could a legacy built through sacrifice and public service truly belong to any one individual? Or was it something larger than personal association, existing beyond titles, relationships, and changing circumstances? Those questions struck at the heart of the growing controversy. With each passing day, fascination intensified. Royal commentators revisited Diana's influence. Historians reflected on her enduring significance. Supporters voiced concerns about preserving her memory exactly as future generations would remember it. And at the center of every discussion stood the same unresolved mystery that had first captured William's attention inside those archives. Because the more people reflected on Diana's lasting impact, the more important the unanswered questions became. The legacy she left behind was simply too significant to ignore, too influential to overlook, and too emotionally powerful to remain untouched by controversy. As the significance of Diana's legacy became impossible to ignore, questions began emerging about who was attempting to place themselves closer to it. The controversy reportedly exploded when whispers emerged that Diana's name was being invoked in ways that some insiders considered deeply inappropriate. What started as private conversations soon became the subject of heated discussion behind palace walls. Suddenly, questions about heritage, symbolism, and public perception were colliding with decades of unresolved tensions that many believed had never truly disappeared. What made the situation so explosive was not merely the suggestion itself, but the emotional weight attached to the name at the center of it all. Diana was not just another member of the royal family whose memory had faded into history. She remained one of the institution's most powerful and influential figures. Her story continued to resonate across generations, and because of that, any attempt to connect oneself to her legacy carried enormous consequences. According to growing palace speculation, concerns began emerging that Diana's name was becoming intertwined with new discussions in ways that made several senior figures deeply uncomfortable. At first, those concerns reportedly remained confined to private conversations. Palace insiders allegedly debated whether the matter was being exaggerated or whether it represented something more significant. Some believed the issue would disappear quietly if left alone. Others feared that allowing it to continue unchecked could create a damaging public perception. The deeper those discussions went, the more divided opinions appeared to become. What one group viewed as harmless association, another reportedly saw as a challenge to long-established understandings about Diana's place within royal history. the divisions quickly became impossible to ignore. As rumors continued spreading through royal circles, courtiers reportedly found themselves discussing subjects that had remained sensitive for years. Old disagreements resurfaced. Historical tensions that many believed had faded quietly returned to the forefront. Diana's legacy had always occupied a unique space within the monarchy, and now that space was becoming the center of an increasingly uncomfortable debate. Every new conversation seemed to generate fresh questions, each one more complicated than the last. That growing uncertainty eventually reached William. According to multiple reports circulating among royal commentators, the Prince of Wales was informed that concerns regarding Diana's legacy were becoming increasingly serious. For William, the issue reportedly carried a level of personal significance that extended far beyond ordinary palace disagreements. Diana was not simply a historical figure to him, she was his mother. Her memory represented a lifetime of experiences, sacrifices, and emotions that could never be reduced to ceremonial discussions or institutional politics. That reality changed everything. What may have initially appeared to be a minor controversy suddenly became a matter requiring careful attention. As William reportedly sought additional information, palace observers noticed the atmosphere becoming increasingly strained. Questions multiplied. Conversations grew more cautious. Individuals who had once spoken freely now appeared hesitant. The feeling spreading through royal circles was not one of certainty but of unease. Too many people seemed aware that something significant was unfolding, yet too few were willing to discuss it openly. Meanwhile, public fascination continued to grow. The possibility that Diana's legacy had become the subject of internal disagreement proved impossible for commentators to ignore. Every new rumor attracted additional scrutiny. Every fragment of information generated fresh speculation. And with each passing day, the controversy seemed to expand beyond the original issue, becoming part of a larger conversation about memory, heritage, and the preservation of royal history itself. Yet for William, the matter was never about headlines, gossip, or competing narratives. The deeper he looked into the situation, the more convinced he reportedly became that something far more important was at stake. Because beneath the controversy, beneath the rumors, and beneath the growing tension inside palace walls, there existed a principle that could not be compromised. For William, however, the issue was never simply about symbolism. It was about protecting something he believed belonged to history itself. Those who know William often describe him as patient, measured, and deliberate. Yet there are certain subjects that have always carried special meaning for him, and Diana's legacy stands above all others. As reports continued to circulate, many observers believed the Prince of Wales reached a point where remaining silent was no longer an option. For years, William had developed a reputation for caution. Unlike many public figures who respond immediately to controversy, he often preferred to gather information, consult trusted advisors, and carefully consider every possible consequence before taking action. That approach had served him well throughout some of the most turbulent chapters in modern royal history. But according to growing speculation, the question surrounding Diana's legacy touched something far deeper than an ordinary palace disagreement. This was personal. The further the controversy expanded, the more difficult it became to ignore. What had begun as whispers hidden within archives and private discussions was now spreading throughout royal circles. Commentators were openly discussing the situation. Palace insiders were reportedly exchanging concerns behind closed doors. Even individuals who normally avoided involvement in internal matters appeared increasingly aware that a sensitive issue was unfolding. Through it all, William remained focused on one central question: how had the situation reached this point? According to reports, he began consulting some of the people he trusted most. Those conversations were believed to include senior advisors with extensive knowledge of royal history, protocol, and the complex relationship between public perception and institutional stability. The objective was not simply to understand the controversy itself. It was to determine whether Diana's legacy was at risk of becoming something it was never intended to be. The more perspectives William gathered, the more determined he reportedly became to address the issue directly. And he was not alone. Throughout the unfolding situation, Catherine was widely believed to be one of William's most trusted sources of support. Over the years, the Prince and Princess of Wales had navigated challenges that tested both their personal resilience and their commitment to the institution. Observers frequently noted how closely aligned they appeared when confronting difficult decisions. As speculation intensified, many believed Catherine fully understood why the matter carried such significance for William. That support strengthened his resolve. Meanwhile, scrutiny from royal commentators continued increasing. Every development generated new analysis, every rumour produced fresh theories. Some believed the controversy would eventually fade away without major consequences. Others argued that the situation had already grown too large to disappear quietly. The longer questions remained unanswered, the more attention they attracted. What had once been a private concern was gradually becoming one of the most discussed stories within royal circles. The atmosphere reportedly grew increasingly tense, not because anyone knew exactly how events would unfold, but because uncertainty itself had become a source of pressure. Palace figures appeared cautious, commentators seemed divided, supporters and critics interpreted developments in dramatically different ways. Beneath every discussion lingered the same unresolved issue: what would William do next? By this stage, many observers believed a turning point had arrived. The Prince of Wales had spent weeks examining the situation, consulting advisors, and evaluating competing claims. Remaining silent was no longer seen as a realistic option. Too much attention had focused on the controversy, too many questions had emerged, and too much was at stake for someone who viewed Diana's legacy as a responsibility rather than a symbol. Yet, just as William appeared ready to confront the issue head-on, events took another unexpected turn. New information reportedly began circulating among palace insiders, adding an entirely different dimension to the controversy. Suddenly, what had already been viewed as a sensitive matter threatened to become something far larger, drawing even greater scrutiny and raising even more difficult questions. Yet even as William moved to address the issue, another revelation was beginning to emerge, one that threatened to make the entire controversy far more explosive. Royal history shows that disputes over legacy are rarely simple. They often become battles over identity, influence, and the future direction of the institution itself. As speculation intensified, insiders reportedly found themselves divided into competing camps, each interpreting the unfolding events through a very different lens. By this point, the controversy had evolved far beyond its original scope. What began as questions surrounding Diana's legacy was now becoming a broader debate about history, symbolism, and the future of the monarchy itself. Inside royal circles, people were no longer arguing about a single event or a single claim. They were debating what Diana's memory represented, who had the authority to speak for that legacy, and how it should be preserved for future generations. Those questions created deep divisions. According to growing speculation, palace insiders found themselves increasingly separated into opposing viewpoints. Some believed the concerns surrounding the controversy had been exaggerated and that the entire situation was being interpreted too aggressively. Others reportedly felt that allowing uncertainty to continue would risk blurring important historical boundaries. Neither side appeared willing to completely back down. As a result, discussions that had once remained private became increasingly intense. The disagreement was not necessarily about facts, it was about interpretation. One group reportedly viewed the unfolding events through the lens of modern public relations, arguing that public perception changes constantly and that historical figures are often remembered differently by different generations. Another group viewed the issue from a more traditional perspective. To them, Diana's legacy represented a carefully preserved part of royal history that required protection from reinterpretation. No matter how well-intentioned it might appear, that divide continued widening. As the controversy gained momentum, media scrutiny intensified dramatically. Every development became the subject of fresh analysis. Commentators offered competing explanations. Royal correspondents searched for clues hidden within public appearances, official statements, and insider reports. What had once been a quiet palace matter was now becoming a national conversation. The more attention the story received, the more difficult it became for anyone involved to simply move on. Public reaction added another layer of complexity. Diana remains one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history. Because of that, emotions surrounding her legacy often run deeper than ordinary royal controversies. Supporters voiced concerns about preserving her memory exactly as they believed she should be remembered. Others argued that history naturally evolves over time. Every perspective seemed to create new questions rather than new answers. Instead of bringing clarity, the growing debate only made the situation more complicated. Meanwhile, palace figures reportedly became increasingly aware of the potential long-term consequences. The issue was no longer limited to present-day headlines. It touched broader questions about heritage, responsibility, and the stewardship of historical legacies. If boundaries surrounding Diana's memory became unclear now, what might that mean years from today? How would future generations understand her role within royal history? And who would ultimately be responsible for safeguarding that understanding? Those concerns elevated the stakes considerably. For William, the controversy reportedly represented more than a disagreement about public perception. For others, it reflected larger questions about the monarchy's relationship with its own history. Regardless of perspective, one fact appeared undeniable: the issue could not remain unresolved indefinitely. Too many questions had accumulated. Too many interpretations were competing for attention, and too many people were waiting for clarity. As weeks of speculation continued, attention gradually shifted away from the arguments themselves and toward something else entirely. Observers increasingly believed that a defining moment was approaching, a decision, a response, something capable of bringing direction to a controversy that seemed to grow more complicated with every passing day. While competing narratives continued to spread, attention increasingly shifted toward one final decision that could settle the matter once and for all. Then came the development that transformed speculation into a defining royal moment. According to growing reports, key figures inside the institution had reached conclusion about how Diana's legacy should be protected moving forward. The implications stretched far beyond the immediate controversy and carried consequences that could influence royal dynamics for years to come. After weeks of rumors, private discussions, competing interpretations, and growing public fascination, many observers sensed that the controversy had finally reached its turning point. The questions that had dominated royal conversations for so long could not remain unanswered forever. Too much attention had focused on the issue. Too many emotions had become attached to it, and perhaps most importantly, too many people believed that Diana's legacy deserved a level of clarity that only a decisive response could provide. According to palace speculation, senior figures within the institution ultimately came to a shared understanding about what mattered most. The focus was no longer on personalities, competing narratives, or public controversy. Instead, attention shifted toward preservation. Protecting Diana's memory became the central objective. Whatever disagreements may have existed behind closed doors, many commentators believed there was growing recognition that her legacy occupied a unique place in royal history. It could not simply be treated as another subject of debate. It carried too much historical significance and too much emotional meaning for millions of people around the world. That realization appeared to change the conversation. Rather than arguing about who stood closest to Diana's legacy, discussions increasingly focused on how that legacy should be safeguarded for future generations. The distinction was subtle but important. One approach centered on ownership, the other centered on stewardship, and as many observers noted, stewardship had always been the principle that allowed institutions to survive beyond the individuals who temporarily occupied them. Public fascination quickly reached new heights. The possibility that a major decision had been reached generated enormous interest among royal watchers. Commentators debated the implications. Historians reflected on Diana's lasting impact. Analysts examined what the reported developments might reveal about the future direction of the monarchy. Every perspective seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. The controversy had evolved into something much larger than anyone originally expected. What began as a rumor had become a defining test, not simply for William but for the institution itself. For years, the royal family has faced questions about continuity, modernization, and public trust. In many ways, the controversy surrounding Diana's memory touched all of those themes simultaneously. It forced people to confront difficult questions about how history should be preserved, who bears responsibility for protecting it, and what role future generations will play in carrying those responsibilities forward. That is why so many royal commentators viewed the reported outcome as significant. Its importance extended far beyond the immediate dispute. It suggested that the monarchy remained deeply aware of the symbolic power attached to its history. More importantly, it demonstrated an understanding that some legacies transcend personal interests. They become part of something larger than any individual, something that belongs to the institution, to history, and to the people who continue to draw meaning from it. As the controversy gradually began losing momentum, a broader picture started coming into focus. The story was never solely about Diana. It was about what happens when history, memory, and responsibility collide. It was about the choices institutions make when confronted with difficult questions. And it was about the willingness to place preservation above personal ambition when the stakes become too important to ignore. But the most important part of the story wasn't who won the argument, it was what the outcome revealed about the monarchy itself. More than 2 decades after her passing, Diana continues to shape conversations about the royal family in ways few could have imagined. Her story remains emotionally powerful because it speaks to something timeless, the struggle between duty, public expectation, and personal sacrifice. That enduring connection explains why debates surrounding her legacy still carry such extraordinary significance. As the controversy slowly approached its conclusion, many observers found themselves reflecting on a larger reality that extended far beyond palace, rumors and competing narratives. Diana's influence had survived changes in generations, leadership, and public opinion because it was never built solely on royal status. It was built on emotional connection. For millions of people, she represented compassion, resilience, and a willingness to carry personal burdens under extraordinary public pressure. That is why every discussion involving her legacy continues to resonate so deeply, even today. What began as a quiet palace rumor ultimately evolved into a much larger conversation about ownership, memory, and history. Whether every reported detail proves accurate or not, one fact remains undeniable. Princess Diana's legacy has transcended individuals, titles, and generations. It belongs to a story much bigger than any single person who might wish to be associated with it. Throughout the controversy, William's reported determination reflected something many people understood instinctively. To him, preserving Diana's legacy was never simply about family history. It was about protecting the integrity of a story that continues to inspire people around the world. The public reaction throughout the debate revealed just how strongly that sentiment remains. Every rumor sparked discussion. Every development generated attention. And every question ultimately led back to the same enduring truth that Diana's place in history remains uniquely powerful. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson to emerge from the entire controversy. Legacies cannot be controlled through proximity, claimed through association, or strengthened through public perception alone. Their true strength comes from the values they represent and the people who continue to protect those values over time. As the monarchy moves into a new era, the responsibility of preserving its history will remain one of its most important challenges. And as the dust finally began to settle, a larger truth about legacy, responsibility, and royal history came sharply into focus. Diana's story continues to matter because it represents something larger than any individual dispute. It reminds future generations that history carries responsibilities as well as privileges, and that the most enduring legacies are those protected through respect rather than possession. Because in the end, legacies are not inherited through association, they are preserved through duty, respect, and the willingness to protect them for generations still to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.